You're tuned to the DOHP Signal. I'm your host, Hanley, former military medic, author of Photos from the Front Lines, and the founder of DOHP. My guest today, he's the founder and chief operating officer of Prodigy EMS, my friend and yours, James DiClemente. James, how are you doing today, buddy?
Great, Derek. Appreciate you having me. Excited to chat.
Of course, yeah, thanks so much for being on the show. Thanks for being a supporter of my work. You have some of my images as your hero shots on your homepage and scattered throughout your site and whatnot. So I appreciate your support. Let's get right into it, man. Tell us, for the folks who maybe don't know, tell us a little bit about what Prodigy EMS is. What do you guys do? And kind of how you stumbled upon this concept.
Yeah, so Prodigy EMS at its core is a learning management system for EMS providers. And we try to focus on kind of both halves of the world of EMS education online, the technology piece, and we have a full-time dev staff that's working solely to make Prodigy a better platform. And the content side, and going to the second half of your question, was really that content side that helped us kind of recognize this need where, I was director of education and ambulance service. We were looking for a product to replace our current learning management system. The software was okay. Some of them had decent content, but we really didn't find anything that was the whole package. But it was really that content piece and that continual development of quality evidence-based content that we really wanted to go after. And, we're not looking for shiny, we're not looking for flashy, we're looking for things that you can learn today and use tomorrow, things that are practical to the average EMS clinician. And we've always continued to update our catalog, always focus on the content. This year, we've made a commitment as a team to publish at least one credit class every single week. So any of our providers, any of our subscribers are able to come in and always get something new, always get something fresh, and really look for opportunities to improve EMS through education.
Fantastic. Now, you have an interesting background. Tell us a little bit about how you kind of came to be into the public safety world before getting into getting Prodigy going.
Yeah, I have a story. I think like a lot of people, which is my plan was never to get into EMS, was never to get into public safety. I was a communications major in college. I didn't really know what I was going to do with that. At one point, I had a plan to go into student life and actually was enrolled in a master's of higher education right before I enrolled in my EMT program. And about a month before, it was like, I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I pulled back. And actually, I went to EMT school because that's what Google told me I needed to do to become a firefighter. So I went to EMT school, liked it, thought I'll be a paramedic for a year and I'll go to PA school. And here we are nearly 20 years later and haven't yet made it into PA school. But, in that time when I was looking for kind of alternate paths, I was, looking at potentially being a teacher and I was looking at some different things. So I think what really kept me in was the ability to utilize some of the skills and things that I've done, in the higher education side where I worked briefly before I got into EMS and that teaching side. And I got into the teaching aspect of EMS almost immediately.
Mm.
As soon as they would let me teach CPR classes, I was teaching CPR classes. I became a paramedic. And again, as soon as they would let me teach in paramedic school, I started to teach. I was a paramedic program director for about 10 years. Some of that overlapped with my work at Prodigy until we kind of grew and I wasn't able to do both of those roles. And in that time, working clinically as a paramedic, but you know, I I fell in love with all the things that I think we all fall in love with EMS. It really does have great people. It has an interesting culture from what you would find in many other industries. It's always changing. It's a lot of the reasons that most people say they stayed in EMS, which is what kind of drew me in. And then that ability to add in the teaching was really what stuck for me. And I love the idea that I could be a paramedic, I could stay in this field, but also I could continue that teaching passion that I had.
Yeah, and I think I felt the same thing too when I was an educator of, and certainly even more so with what you have going on with Prodigy is the kind of, as a paramedic, you can help one person at a time as you go, whereas as an educator, and especially with the platform you have going on now, your reach is exponential. Each educator you train or each paramedic you train now is going out and helping multiple people or teaching multiple people and things like that. So kudos to you for getting this thing going. Now, I mean, James, it's not easy to get a business off the ground and be successful. What have been some of your pearls for success for getting Prodigy to where it is now?
Well, my team knows this very well about me, but it's never say no. Sometimes you get to know, but I always start off with a yes. I always start off with how can we help? I always start off what can we do? And really, one of the things that helped us grow was the Refresh 2020 project that we did during COVID. Which in hindsight seems really obvious, but we offered a free national continued competency program for any EMS provider that wanted it. And when I initially got that call, it came from Peter Intevi, and he's like, I don't know if you know Tom Boothele, but he's looking to put this thing together. He just wants to build some videos with some cool presenters and put on Dropbox. And I was like, he told him, you've got to put it on an LMS. And at the time, we were relatively small. We only had about 7,000 users, we were growing very, very slowly. And for somebody to come along and say, hey, we want to take your product that you're slowly growing and give it away for free. I think most people just say, no, it's not possible. But we started off with the yes, let's see how we can make this work. And ultimately, we saw a 10x growth in 9 months in our user base from that. And that really is what propelled us to where we are today. And we do that with so many projects where, I think from a business standpoint, it's so easy to just be like, nope, we're focusing on the core of our business, revenue, growth, expense reduction, all this stuff that seems to matter to the bottom line. But it's building those relationships, it's working with people in the industry, it's building goodwill. That's really what helped us grow. Even today, we still offer 15 or 20 free webinars, free classes every
Mm.
year. It's something that's the core of our model. When we meet weekly, that's always something that's on the top of our agenda is what can we do and offer for free. And I think that's, we recognize there's a business aspect to that, and it's helping us grow our community, it's helping us grow our exposure, but it's doing it in a way that's giving back to the community, and giving back to people. So it's really about making relationships and not being afraid to do stuff that might seem kind of counterintuitive in the moment, and at least thinking through, is this something we can pull off? Because my first talk with Tom wasn't, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. It was, well, let's, I'm interested, let's figure it out, and let's work through the details. But it wasn't the immediate no that I think a lot of people would have, when you're asking them to basically just give away their whole subscription model for free.
100%. And you mentioned being involved in some interesting projects and whatnot. And I know you were an early adopter of the Honorable But Broken film and helping get the word out about that and arrange screenings and that type of a thing. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that project and what that kind of meant to you in this field.
Yeah, and that was something where we had kind of heard about it brewing. The AAA had been approached about it, and I think it initially came to me from Rob Lawrence, and I talked to Bryony, and it felt like it was a great endeavor. I think what she was looking to portray in EMS was something different. So many of the videos that we make in EMS are the cool guy driving around fast in an ambulance, running into buildings, doing CPR, which doesn't really tell the story of EMS and some of the challenges of EMS. People have this idea of what we do, and I think to some extent we do ourselves a disservice because we get people that come into this field and think that every day they're just going to be, delivering babies and saving lives. But most of our job is the kind of, what we describe as a mundane kind of day to day, but it is in most cases, the most challenging day of somebody's life. And we just look at it as like, it's another routine call, but to that person, it's important in the moment. And certainly what Honorable But Broken is looking at is that mental health aspect of EMS and the toll that it takes on us as providers, which I don't think is well understood in the general community. We don't talk about every EMT or paramedic suicide like we talk about every line of duty death. But we absolutely should, because ultimately that's what's going to take our lives. Very rarely does somebody get in an ambulance crash and die. But every single day, somebody commits suicide because of some awful call that they've seen or just that buildup. And those are the stories we need to tell. And it's the other side of that, which is we have an industry that's not set up to succeed financially.
Mm.
And there's a lot of different people working from a lot of different angles on how to correct that. But again, from the public perspective, you call 911, you expect to get an ambulance, but that ambulance ride is very expensive. The personnel should be paid well, and I think we're starting to see movement in that direction. But it's not an industry that's set up in a way that's really sustainable. And I think for many of our communities that are starting to grow, we can't continue to grow that EMS system in the same way that we're growing. And I think that's what brought us into Honorable but Broken. It looked to tell the story of EMS and the plight of EMS in a way that was very realistic and not just looking at kind of the cool, sexy lights and sirens, but what does the day-to-day EMS really do to the people in this field?
Totally. And that's what got me on board with it as well, especially when I learned that Bryony has three children who are in EMS. That put the hook in me as far as like she gets it. She's not just
Hmm.
some like auteur trying to make their film and get in with a organization or whatever. It's she gets it. She's heard the stories firsthand, and she's in a unique position by which she can communicate that through the medium of film and get people on board because the story really needs to hit people here, I think, in the heart. Because I think intellectually you can say, yeah, okay, maybe there's a shortage or maybe there's this or that, but when you hear someone talking about their experience, especially in, the Northeast and New York City during COVID was just, I can't even imagine what a nightmare that was for those providers. So to kind of hear their perspective and what they had to go through and what they're still kind of continuing to have to process and deal with while engaging with the quote unquote routine trauma that a paramedic has to face under normal circumstances and this and that. So I think it's great. And that's also why, this kind of the mission of my book with photos from the front lines was to increase that visibility. Because I think once you understand a problem or once you understand the person behind the uniform, it makes you more likely to want to support them, do things that are going to, take care of their longevity in the field, make sure they can keep showing up to help, the community and things like that. So I think whatever visibility that we can provide is only going to help. And I think the other thing, James, too, is that a big problem that's hidden is the honor piece when it comes to EMS, because I think because of the longevity of, fire and law enforcement, and they have pretty good, PR machines, they've been informing the public as to their value and promoting their services and things like that. And I think because EMS is a little bit newer to the game, we don't have that same sort of longevity of public relations that's been put out to the public. So the more we can get these images and these folks and these stories out there, the better for the field. You're tuned into the Dope Signal. I'm here with James DiClemente. We'll be right back after these messages.
Derek Hanley here, a photographer, a videographer, a veteran combat medic.
Derek Hanley is with us today.
We have on the line with us Derek O'Hanley. What a remarkable book. Obviously, you had no idea when you embarked on this journey of embedding with paramedics and, frontline responders. There was no way to know that a worldwide pandemic was on its way.
His goal was to document the day-by-day life-saving that they do. And now you can experience what it was like.
He's done a book that should be a coffee table book in homes and offices. It's something in the office that somebody's going to pick up, look at, and be moved by. This is the book.
Our military protects us overseas. Our first responders are the ones who protect us at home. And we need to start thinking about what we can do to take care of medics like we do for our military.
The book is Photos from the Front Line.
Photos from the front line.
Photos from the front lines.
Photos from the front lines.
So that's dope, DOHP.net, and you can find Derek's book there.
All right, you're tuned in to the Dope Signal. I'm your host, Derek O'Hanley. We're here with James DiClemente, the founder of Prodigy EMS. James, continuing education has changed quite a bit over the years when it comes to EMS. What are some of the changes that you've seen on your side? And, where do you think the future is kind of headed for this type of industry?
Yeah, I think there's a much higher expectation now of what you see from a presenter, and not just kind of the flashy PowerPoints, but how they're able to communicate, how they are able to speak and tell that story that they're trying to tell. Fortunately, we're moving away from the world where we throw up a 200 slide PowerPoint, click through it, read the words on it, and then give you a certificate. And we're starting to see people really embrace the idea of storytelling in education. What am I trying to get out of, you? What do you want to get out of this lecture? How am I going to improve you when you get through it? And we're seeing that build, obviously, on the conference and the live side. We're seeing it build in the online side. And a lot of that comes from exposure and opportunity and looking at the different mediums that are available. There are so many good educators that are just putting out free content every day on social media, that are writing blog posts, that are making videos, that are, putting you in a place where you expect to see a level of engagement as an educator and a level of engagement as a student that we didn't see 10 or 15 years ago. Some of that, obviously, the technology makes it a lot easier. You've got kids in their basement that are making things that look like a movie, just a few years ago. There's no way somebody's gonna, allow or expect or accept some low level kind of technology and video work and audio work when they're watching their class. They expect that higher production value. And we're seeing a move now towards, in the kind of micro learning world, and this is something we're dipping our toes into their Prodigy, which is, there are a lot of folks that are making great content on TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube. That's a, 2-minute bite-sized content that you can flick through and you can get some education from it. We recently started to work with Jimmy Apple, the EMS Avenger, to license his content to add on to the Prodigy platform. And he's built some classes specifically for us, but still in that kind of micro learning side. We're working with CAPSI to actually allow us to issue credit for a micro learning experience. Some of the holdback right now is really regulatory. From a technology and a production standpoint, that's done. We've got that. But how do we let you watch a 2-minute video and somehow get credit? And, we're working through what that looks like with CAPSI. We actually had the opportunity to meet with CAPSI leadership and NREMT leadership. And everybody agrees this is absolutely something we should be pursuing. This is something we should be doing. This is something they'd accept. So we're excited to see how that continues to evolve and what we'll ultimately get from there. And, I think overall it's trying to make the content itself the driver of compliance. And what I mean by that is, we've all taken the online classes where every 3 minutes you've got to click, I'm still watching, I'm still watching. If the content is so disengaging that they need a button every 3 minutes to make sure you're still there, they've already lost you. Going and clicking a button doesn't actually mean that you're there. It just gives them a box check to say, yep, we've made sure this person's engaged. And what we try to do, and I think what a lot of educators try to do, is give you content that makes you want to stay engaged. We get that, and I get it from a lot of people that I know they're like, I started to watch Prodigy, and they're like, I expected to do other work, but I was sucked into this lecture from this presenter. It's like, that's exactly what we want. We want the training to be the driver of compliance. And I think from a regulatory standpoint, what I'm hoping we see is that we're focused less and less on the kind of box check stuff of how do we make sure that they're compliant, and how do we let the market drive what's quality education. And it's a slow process. I think so many people are just used to, I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and I can't watch the video faster than 1 speed because then it's out of compliance, and all these little things that don't really add to the educational experience. I think we're starting to strip some of those away and focus on what's good education, what's good training, and what can we do. And we see that from our clients. We've even started to see this transition where the software and the management and the compliance piece was a lot more of a concern when we started 10 years ago than it is today. Today, when we talk to leadership looking for a new LMS or looking for their first LMS, almost always the first question is the content. How often do you update it? How is it made? Who reviews it? So they're looking and they're asking the question of, is this good training? Now, does this software check all the boxes I needed to check? And that's really encouraging. That's showing that people recognize that in order to advance as a profession, the education needs to advance with us. I think we all look for the magic bullet. Do we all need degrees? Do we all need to be a professional service? Do we need to be an essential service in our state? No, all those things can help, but I don't think there's one magic bullet. It's how do we make the providers in the field more competent and better clinicians so we are affecting more change out in our community. That's how we continue to grow as a profession. And a piece of that is training, both initial training and that ongoing training.
Yeah, I hear you 100%. And one of the things that's been interesting, and I'm curious to get your take on it, is I don't know if it's even affecting you at all, but AI, has that been, do you see any sort of disruption in your model, or do you see, does it have no effect on EMS training? What do you, from your perspective, what do you see as the future of that in the field?
I'll be honest, I think we see it as a potential disruptor. I don't know that it's for the better.
Mm,
We've started to see it creep into some areas, and I think we can all spot AI content pretty easily. The AI image is certainly one of the reasons we love to work with you. Is it's just every time I look at some AI paramedic image, I just kind of cringe a little bit because it's first of all, it's not helping us as a profession, but it's not representing well what we want to represent. And I think it's making it really easy for people to get some of that stuff done. I mean, certainly now we use AI as a tool for us to review content. It's a great tool to help
mm,
you clean up writing. It's a great tool to review, quizzes, especially looking for a miskeyed quiz or something like
mm,
there's some great uses for it. I think where we've started to see it and the negative side is we started to see content in full classes now that are just, ask AI to build me a class about congestive heart failure and boom, it gives me
hmm
what it gives me. We have played around with it a little bit on the class creation side. We have a class that we use the Google Notebook LM software that does kind of the podcast style stuff in an interesting way. And it probably took us longer to build that class than it would have just to present it, but it was
mm,
more of a trial for us. And essentially here's the manuscript and then here's an AI audio version reviewing that particular research study. And we did this with all the consortium papers for the evidence-based consortium to look at all their research papers. And we felt like it was an easier way to consume hours worth of content and a dozen articles than to always review them. I think it's something that's going to continue to sneak in, and I think using it in a way that benefits us and finds errors is great.
mm.
But using it as a replacement for an educator, we're obviously just not quite there yet. I've seen some people try some cool uses of it with case review projects, and we're
Mm.
seeing it in some of the virtual simulation where previously we'd have to key in every possible scenario. Somebody
Okay.
might give aspirin to the person having asthma, and what do we do? How does the mannequin or the simulated patient react in that? So we've seen AI used in some of those areas, and I think we'll continue to see it. I know from a regulatory standpoint, CAPC has been kind of hands off with it. They basically tell us that if we use AI, we have to disclose that, but they don't necessarily tell us how we can use it. And I think that will continue to change as we see the technology evolve more and more. The software side, I think, for us is the biggest change.
Hmm.
And that is an area, from the actual education side, I don't think it's great. We were just, talking on one of our meetings where one of our people asked AI a question and it gave them an answer that was completely fake. And they called the AI out on it and said, that doesn't seem right. They're like, you're right. It's not right. I just wanted to kind of agree with what you said. It gave this really bizarre answer. And it's like, well, that's not helpful if I'm trying to train somebody how to save somebody's life.
Oof.
But on the software side, from a technology standpoint, it's really interesting. And there are a lot of opportunities to use that. I think in the way we look at it now is the actual development piece is not the challenge. The challenge now is the ideas and the security. That's
Mm.
where the development staff really comes in because it will build you a really nice looking piece of software. Not great, but a nice looking piece of software, usable piece of software. The security is a concern, and then the idea is a concern. It can only build you the ideas that you have. So that's really
Hmm.
where we're starting to see the biggest impact is on the kind of software side of the education delivery.
Wow. Interesting stuff. And I'm curious to see how this evolves moving into the future. Now, you teach a lot of people, but you've, been all over the country. You've filmed with lots of interesting folks. What are some things that you've learned in this journey of creating this company and getting all this content out there and helping, as you're saying, educate the folks who are saving the lives?
Yeah, I mean, I love traveling around the country and talking to different providers, different perspectives. It's really interesting to me the stories that people have and how they got into this. And I'm always curious, I have this idea that I'm going to start working in the field once in a while as a paramedic. I'm probably not. It's probably for the best. It's really more like, can I find the stuff in the back of an ambulance that would concern me? But with that, it's like trying to learn what people are interested in. I also get really inspired when we travel because there are so many people that are really dedicated to making sure EMS continues to grow. And it's not just at the conferences and the presenters and the people that we all know and we see, but it's the individual providers that are walking around in an exhibit hall trying to find a better tool or a better piece of technology to make their ambulance service better. It's the people that are going to these lectures on their own dime because they know ultimately this is going to help them. And it's learning some of that, and it's learning really what is at the heart of this profession because from our standpoint, we have some ideas of what people want, whether it's from the software side or the content side, but that's not always the case. And it's really finding out how people are looking to learn, what they're looking to learn, what's going to benefit them, what trends are you seeing around the country, and it's having those conversations. And for me, it's the bigger national conferences where you can really have these because where else are you going to get field providers from all over the country, in different parts of the world where you can learn from them and what they're doing. Even, it might be somebody that's a brand new EMT and they got their, card a month ago when they came to this conference. And well, what brought you here? Why are you here? You just got into this profession. Hearing what, people expect to take away from it. It's really inspiring to, recognize that there are a lot of people in this country that are really passionate about what we do.
Totally. And, like, I'm sure there's other things, like Honorable but Broken that you're involved in outside of just the traditional kind of, CE delivery stuff. Do you have any other projects or things that you've done over the last couple of years that folks maybe don't know about, that would be good to give some visibility to?
Yeah, we did a really interesting project with New Orleans EMS called The Ones Who Stayed. And it was a look back, it was for the 20th anniversary of Katrina. And it was a look back at kind of what New Orleans EMS went through during that time. It's still continuing to get views on YouTube. We were amazed at the exposure and response and the view count that we got from that project. And just reading the comments through, you get your standard internet trolls, but it's mostly positive. It's mostly, I was there, this was terrible, this was a difficult circumstance, and recognizing that there were people at New Orleans EMS that just packed up and left, and they weren't able to stay, they weren't able to help because they recognized it. But so many of those people put themselves in danger and put themselves in just a terrible circumstance to stay in their community and continue to help their community, and in talking with them and in listening to their stories. That's really what it was about. It wasn't, well, this is my job, I've got to do it. It's, this is my community. These are people I know. There's no other option but to stay with no equipment and no supplies and no electricity and no food, and find a way to help. And just like the ingenuity, and they're talking about just landing multiple military helicopters in a civilian setting, something that none of them have ever done. But like just knowing how to do that was really fascinating. And the other piece that we had some involvement with in its initial growth, 6 Minutes to Live. One of our folks, Hillary Gates, is part of that team, and it's a really fascinating look at cardiac arrest management around the country. And their ultimate goal is to increase cardiac arrest survival. And we did an initial kind of teaser film with them, which is available on YouTube. I would encourage people to watch. It's a real story about a patient that went into cardiac arrest. They interview her family, and it looks at how that transformed the DC EMS system and what changed and how we saw that grow because of it. And their ultimate goal is to tell these stories around the country. And that's another area where us in EMS have the ability to impact lives beyond just being in the back of an ambulance. What are we doing in our communities to make sure people are prepared to respond to a sudden cardiac arrest? Are we doing hands-on CPR training? Are we making sure we have AEDs around our community? Are we making sure that people feel comfortable with accessing the 911 system? And I think it's really an untapped opportunity for us when we look at what we did, especially through COVID and the public health. People just assume, well, yeah, EMS can go do the testing, and EMS can go give the vaccines, and EMS can do all this stuff that we really weren't trained to do. Like that was never part of our scope until that moment. This is another one of those areas where, we are all very well equipped to go and manage these at very low cost to us as a system. Certainly buying a couple of AEDs might cost some money, but just teaching community members how to do CPR, bringing it into the high schools, bringing it into the middle schools, and making sure that everybody knows what to do if they witness a sudden cardiac arrest. Because we've all been in those situations where we show up as an EMS provider and there's bystanders around, somebody in cardiac arrest, and nothing's been done. And we know the likelihood of survival is almost nothing because the people standing around didn't know how to respond or didn't know that they should respond. And that's a scenario that should never happen. We should never have a situation where there's bystanders and CPR isn't being done when we show up. And I think as EMS systems, that's something that we can do. And the 6 Minutes to Live team, that's really what they're looking to get out to the communities.
Powerful stuff. Now, because of your background as a paramedic, I'd love to hear if you have any stories from your time in the field that kind of stick out, good or bad. I think our brain kind of value tags the bad calls more heavily as an evolutionary trait, which is why those kind of stick out a little bit more. But I always like to hear too about the good calls, because those can neutralize a lot of the bad calls and kind of make this job worth doing it. So are there any kind of that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, like you said, there's the bad call. All the bad calls seem to stick out. In the times when things just didn't go right, or you're in a situation that you just weren't quite ready for. There's one call that sticks out because it's the first call where I was a paramedic where I felt like, all right, we just saved somebody's life, right? I wasn't a paramedic for that long.
Hell yeah.
And it was a patient having a severe asthma exacerbation. They were apneic when we showed up. There was actually CPR in progress when we showed up because the first responding crew didn't immediately recognize a pulse. Young kid, like 19 years old, in a very small bedroom. They hadn't pulled him out, so it was just like worst case scenario. And I'm showing up as a relatively new paramedic, and we're looking at this kid. The family's just emotional, like you would expect. CPR is being done, and you're like, oh, this is a terrible situation. And we were able to immediately jump in, provide airway management, multiple rounds of epi for him, and just ended up, by the time we got to the hospital, he was starting to respond to us. He was breathing on his own. We had actually removed the king tube that we had put in, and he ended up being discharged like just 2 days later.
Wow.
And this was a kid that we showed up, young kid, and this was like the first time as a paramedic I was like, man, this job matters, right? Being able to respond in these situations and know what to do and feel comfortable matters. And it was, that was one of those calls. You always wonder, like, if too many bad calls came before the good call, am I still even here, right? Like 15 years ago, I just walk away because it keeps piling up. And I think that's what ultimately happens to a lot of people. But I think you're right. I think focusing on the good calls, people always ask, and now I never generally tell people that. I used to always just say, "Oh, I'm a paramedic," even when I was teaching, because it's just easier than explaining. Like, yeah, I work for a learning management system. Nobody cares about that. And now I usually just say, like, I'm in education technology, because the first question is, "Oh, you must see some bad stuff. Like, what's the worst thing you've seen?" I don't know. I got a sandwich once that had mayo on the outside of the bread instead of the inside. That's probably the worst thing I've seen. But it's like such a weird question for people to ask, because and this is going back to your question about honorable but broken, like in their mind, it's like, oh, that's cool, right? You saw this cool, really gross thing. And it's not. Like, these are the things that weigh on us. These are the things that push us out. These are the things that lead to, depression and all the negatives in EMS. And like, that's the first question people always seem to ask: what's the worst thing that you've seen? And, your question of what's a good call that you had, I think is so important for us to focus on. I was never an instructor that liked to teach through war stories. It never felt right to me. Certainly there are some learning events. I've had a lot of vehicle contacts in my career. I hit a deer once that just literally jumped out in front of me. So that's an area where I do, and I have a whole lecture where I just show drive cams of myself getting in accidents and use those as learning opportunities. People joke that the only reason I'm in the classroom is because of all those drive cams. But like those are areas where I think we can positively teach people through. But the war story approach never really set well with me because it's like focusing on what is really the worst parts of our job
Yeah.
as teaching aides, and I don't know that that always helps.
Yeah, I think a story here and there can help punctuate whatever point you're trying to drive home, but all day long it's just like, come on. Yeah, it's too much. And yeah, the worst call you've ever seen question is so ubiquitous. And I can understand from their perspective, because when I was first getting in as a paramedic, like, yeah, you want to see the rad stuff. You want to do the things, the high occurrence, low, or no, high acuity, low occurrence stuff that people always can kind of put a feather in their cap and say, I've done this type of a thing. But yeah, as you're saying, you're basically, hey, please reenact your most horrific trauma for my entertainment in this moment. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, maybe that's not. And I usually tell people, like, if you meet a paramedic, don't ask them that question. Ask them anything else. They don't want to have to answer that. So, at least since COVID, the field has changed quite a bit, and there's still a lot of the problems present that Honorable But Broken Film was bringing up many years ago. And I think there's been some progress in some areas, but I think there's still a lot of those issues of burnout, retention, mental health challenges, all those types of things are still kind of there. And like I said, I think there's been some progress in some areas, but what kind of gives you hope, James, about what you've been seeing the direction of EMS taking?
Yeah, I think, you're absolutely right. And there was so much positivity and then it just kind of drifted away. We did try to seize the moment a bit, and I think we've continued to see that grow. I think our communities are starting to recognize the value outside of just transporting people to the hospital. And we're starting to see more programs, which, community paramedicine, kind of mobile integrated health stuff, community health stuff, just finding ways to use paramedics in an EMS type system because I think people just going to an ER, going to a freestanding clinic instead of working for their local EMS agency, that is pulling people out of
Hmm.
our industry. But it's when you're engaging your local EMS system to do other things, I think we're starting to see communities recognize our value. Because if our only value to them is we pick you up when you're sick and we drive you to the hospital, we're an Uber. But if
Mm.
they see us as a critical part of the healthcare system, and when we show up, we don't just drive you to the hospital, we provide medical treatment. We
Hmm.
give you medications. There's a lot of things that we're able to do in your home that mimic what they would do when you get to the emergency room. And not only that, we might prevent you from ever having to go to that emergency room. We
Hmm.
can be the definitive care in certain circumstances. And there are certain conditions where EMS can and should be the definitive care. And I think people are starting to recognize that. And it's a lot easier to talk about funding and to talk about
Mm.
reimbursement and to talk about pay when they recognize your value is more than your truck that brings people. You still, I think I've never been one that got all angry when people call me an ambulance driver. But you still find a lot of the public that think that the person that drives the ambulance is somehow the one that's in charge because that's what the role of the ambulance is. And I think recognizing that we actually do so, and that's anytime somebody called me the ambulance driver, I said actually sometimes I sit in the back. But I think recognizing that there's more of a role, that's what's encouraging to me.
Mm.
That our communities are starting to recognize that we are a valuable service. Because, certainly from a regulatory standpoint, being an essential service means something and it does something, but it's a title, it's a word. It doesn't really show
Hmm.
the impact of EMS. I think looking at how we are doing things in the community and what we can do in the community and recognizing that value, that's what really encourages me to know that we can continue to expand our role and get recognized as a member of the healthcare community.
Totally. And yeah, I think, part of that is, yes, that's the essential service is kind of a top-down approach to getting the funding and things like that we're talking about. And I think, what we're kind of talking is the ground up approach of educating the public, letting them see the value, letting them understand, and then, I think, like I said, the thing that one of the biggest pieces is honor for the folks and what they do. Because if you don't honor something, then you don't care about it. But if you
Mm.
recognize that these people are 12, 24-hour shifts. They're sacrificing time with their family. They're sacrificing their physical health. Back issues and knee issues and all these things are, extremely prevalent if you've been in the field for more than, 10 years or something like that. And then, like I say, similar to the military, I think is we need to start treating our medics as far as like thanking them for their service. Like, hey, I recognize that you have a whole backpack full of stuff that you have to carry until the day that you die, that I don't. And I really appreciate you sacrificing, your mental health and your physical health on my behalf. Let's see how we can take care of you. Can we take care of your education? Can we take care of your health care once you're out of the field? And, you have to deal with these ailments and these mental health challenges, things like that. So, yeah, I think if we can think from, kind of top down and bottom up and do a kind of double pronged approach to try and solve some of these issues, I think that's kind of the way we need to go. James, do you have any kind of final thoughts for the audience as far as anything we've talked about or anything that you'd like to address before we log off here?
No, I appreciate the time. I think we've had some good conversations here about what EMS can do, and I think for anybody listening, it's about finding ways to engage your community. You could be a brand new EMT, you could be ambulance director, you could be an EMS chief. It's about finding ways to engage with your community, show them our values, show them what we can do, and find ways that you can help. Hands-on CPR, first aid training, babysitter training, whatever you can do to make sure that your public is better prepared. I think we look at training ourselves, and obviously from Prodigy, our goal is how do we train ourselves as EMS providers. But we are not the first responders. The citizen that's there when you collapse, the person that's there when you get a bad laceration, that is the first responder in making sure that your community is prepared and making sure that your community is engaged. And ultimately, that helps our profession, where people recognize that we are there to help them, whether it's in preparedness or in an emergency situation, to make sure that our community is safe and our community is taken care of.
I love it. I love it. James, where can people find you?
So you can find me anywhere that Prodigy is. I try to be kind of the man in the background for a lot of this. If you want to get in contact, you can email me at james@prodigyems.com. I'm not really big on social media. Everybody else on my team is, but yeah, send me an email. I don't like to be the only face that's available and out there. So send me an email if you're looking to get in contact.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for speaking with me. Thank you for your time. It's been a great discussion. And hopefully we'll see you out there in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your time, Derek.
All right, you've been listening to the DOHP Signal. We've been talking here with James DiClemente, founder of Prodigy EMS. Tune back in for the next episode.